Hello. I think I'm live. I apologize. I've never done this before. Just going. Appreciate everyone's patience. I'm going to wait and see if some people will come in. But yeah, every week I try to do something audio, interactive, engagement wise. Typically, that's my podcast. My guest this week fell through, so I am trying to do this week to see if it's an option we can keep doing. No idea if it resonates, if a lot of people want to participate, but it might be something we keep doing. Might be something that fails miserably, but I appreciate everyone that has swung by and see a couple questions coming in. So thank you for that. Going to give this a couple minutes and then I will get going. Unfortunately, I solicited questions in here early in the morning today, and a bunch of them came in. And apparently, this chat things erase after an hour or so. So a lot of the built-in questions are not here. So if there's anything you want addressed, again, put it in there. How long this goes is basically a product of how much you guys want to engage and interact. So that is all on you. So first question I see is from Brandon, who says, "Are there any positives about this Michigan football team?" There are some, and I think there's still a lot that can be gained from this season. I talked about this a little bit earlier this week with Sam and Ira over on WTKA, and I think it's a delicate balance to walk and kind of a fine line because you want to get young people a lot of time, and I think that's going to be the biggest positive that can come from this season is getting young players time, seeing who really does well in game situations and who can kind of be a key cog in this thing going forward. And you can learn that in game situations a lot better than you can in practice. So that's I think going to be the biggest thing you can take from this season. I say it's a delicate balance because you can't just play all freshmen and sophomores, or you're going to have even a bigger locker room mutiny. And I think the culture of the program and what's going on in the locker room is kind of some of the reasons some of the stuff has gone south. And if you're going to alienate all the upperclassmen, that's going to be a problem. But I do think they can and should sprinkle in more playing time for the young players. Brad asks expectations for Juwan and the basketball team. It's a good question too. Next week, by the way, on the newsletter, hoping to sprinkle in a little more basketball stuff than usual. It's still going to be pretty football heavy during football season, but going to talk some basketball and hoping to have a basketball related guest on the podcast. As for expectations, I have high expectations. They're picked. I think they came in 6th or 7th in Brendan Quinn's annual polling of Big Ten writers predicting how the season will go. I think my expectations are a little higher than that, but and I think in Ann Arbor, inside Chrysler, I think they have higher expectations too. If you're just living on Twitter and you're just listening to rival banter, then you'll know, okay, yeah, Michigan finished 8th or 9th or whatever it was last year. But you think about where they were in non-conference and part of the way in Big Ten conference play and how those standings sort of shaped up at the end. There was a huge cluster right in that like 3rd to 9th or 10th range, and Michigan ended up toward the bottom of that, but really they were only 2 or 3 games away from being a top 2 or 3 team in the conference. So there's a lot of teams in the Big Ten that return some legitimate talent, but Michigan getting Livers and Wagner both back are huge. Shawnee Brown coming in is a huge addition, and you got a lot of really good young talent coming in. So you won't have as much of the non-conference time for some of these young guys to sort of get their legs under them, get acclimated to the college game, and that might hurt this team. But I do think there's enough veteran leadership with Livers, even Austin Davis to an extent, and Wagner hasn't been here as long, but he's still an established guy. So I think they'll be competitive. I maybe fifth place, fourth place, but I think they're a team that could make the second week of the tournament. And I think the way things are going next year, or the 2021-2022 season, is kind of looking like the bigger deal with the infusion of talent coming in. But I think Juwan Howard's building things, and they're heading in the right transition. Lose John Beeline and never really dip into where this program was a few regimes ago. I think that's a plus. Kind of just talking about the only beat OSU crowd, which I agree with. Mark, watching the hockey team, I'm following online. Actually, just put my kids to bed, and I don't have BTN Plus, and I'm down in Texas, so no Fox Sports Detroit. But I do follow around hockey as much as I can. I actually don't watch a ton of sports outside of Michigan football live because I have two little kids around here, but there's great Michigan writers, great people on social, makes it very easy to follow along, which I very much appreciate. Edward says, you think the issues with the football program are bigger than the coaching and or alleged talent on the roster? I do. And maybe not so much bigger, but I definitely think it's more than just a coaching and a talent thing. I think honestly, I think talent is the least of the concerns on the team. Yes, they don't have Ohio State talent, but they're losing to teams that they're more talented than. This team was considerably more talented than Michigan State, more talented than Indiana, and more talented than Wisconsin. And so, yeah, they're when they line up against Columbus in December, you're not going to be as talented there. But I think Michigan, in every other game they're coming into this season, they're just as if not more talented than everyone else. So I think talent is the least of the concerns. Coaching, I think, is usually an easy crutch to blame. But if you look at the last couple of weeks, Michigan has been outcoached in all three of the games they lost. I mean, Michigan State, again, that huge talent discrepancy. If you look at just on both sides of the ball, I thought Hazelton called a good plan to shut down what Gaddis showed against Minnesota the week before. And then, I mean, Don Brown's defense was completely outcoached, outclassed. A bad Michigan State offense led by a coordinator that I don't think is anything special in Jay Johnson, and they just exploited a weakness that Michigan had on defense by throwing it up to fast receivers and making the referees blow a whistle, or thinking they could outplay Michigan's defensive backs, and that's exactly what they did. So that's out coaching, and I think Michigan's coaching has really been exploited this season. In terms of things beyond coaching and talent, that could be a factor as well. I think the culture of the team, the culture of the program is something that needs to come into question, and I think that's an extension of coaching. But you look at I wrote in my mailbag yesterday that I try not to talk too much about like effort and emotion and stuff like that, because that's not an easily quantifiable thing, and I try to have opinions that are as based on facts and data as possible. But if you just look at demeanors and body language and things like that, there's a stark difference between Michigan and the teams they're lining up across. So yeah, I think there are other issues than than talent and coaching. But I think talent is the least of them right now. I really do, at least for what Michigan is struggling with right now. I think if this program wants to get up to that next tier, you need to be more talented, but that is the least of Michigan's concerns right now because Michigan's losing. Ohio State is not a concern of Michigan right now. Michigan needs to get back to beating the programs that it can and should be beating. What did you not touching that. Pete says, where the season is clearly a disaster so far, or while the season is clearly a disaster so far, is there a reasonable argument that the 18-19 were both good, not great years, with wins against Michigan State twice, Notre Dame last year, Penn State, Wisconsin in 18? Yeah, I mean, if you read anything I was writing this off season or heard me on social or on the radio or whatever, I've been a pretty big proponent of Harbaugh coming into this year and saying the narrative's pretty unfair because I think Michigan has been right in that second tier. They're not Ohio State, but right now Ohio State is on this historically great run, and I think it's a little unfair to expect that to be a benchmark. Obviously, I think Michigan should have beaten Ohio State at least once or twice in the 6 years, but going into the season, I was defending Harbaugh till I got blue in the face because the national narrative was James Franklin's this much better coach than Jim Harbaugh, and the stats just don't say that. Harbaugh didn't have a losing record against any team he's played more than twice, not named Ohio State, and I think Michigan was right on that Penn State, Wisconsin tier, maybe a smidge higher, and obviously Penn State struggling this year too, but right now Wisconsin looks like a much more stable program. So this season is a disaster, of course. But I think what has happened in what's preceded this season makes it less of a no-brainer to just say, okay, let's burn this whole thing down and restart. The problem is, and I know I've written about this a lot, but the problem is the worst thing you can do in terms of making a decision on Harbaugh is waiting it out. I think firing him and I think extending him are both better options than bringing him into next season on the last year of his contract because I think that's just a disaster. So I don't think a lot of Michigan fans really realize this, but like this athletic department, Ward Manuel, like essentially has to make a decision in the next 4 or 5 weeks. So I have a lean on what I think is the preferred thing, but I think what happens in the last 4 or 5 weeks sort of will dictate that. But a lot of the a lot of the defending and the optimism I had coming into the season has been changed pretty dramatically based on everything that's happened on the field this season. Lewis specifically asks, do I see Harbaugh leaving at the end of the season? I think the best case scenario for both sides would be if there was an NFL job that opened up for Harbaugh and he was able to land on his feet there and Michigan was able to have a coaching change without a messy breakup, without really having to sort of walk into Bo Pelini territory with Nebraska and quote unquote fire a coach that basically has done better this season, notwithstanding than any other coach here in the past decade plus. So I think the way things are trending this season, this program might be better off bringing in some new blood. But I don't think Harbaugh is going to voluntarily resign unless there is an opportunity for him to walk right into. And I have a hard time believing that Ward Manuel is going to fire Harbaugh on the spot unless things keep getting worse this season, which is within the realm of possibility. Josh Parmalee says, do you think Gaddis isn't that good, or is Jim meddling with the play calling mid-game instead of sticking with the game plan? I see a lot of that chatter. I think that's probably a little unfair. I I think whenever the offense kind of struggles, it's easy to just go, oh well, Harbaugh must be getting his hands in there. It's possible, but I don't think I feel like that's almost giving Gaddis building in an excuse for Gaddis. He's in charge of that offense. He's the play caller. Michigan altered how they called plays. It used to be a collaborative thing, and Harbaugh has explicitly said Gaddis is the one calling it. And until I hear them say it or hear from someone reputable within the program, I'm working under the assumption that Gaddis is calling the plays, and um, it hasn't been good enough the last 3 weeks. I've been very disappointed with the way Michigan's called plays. I've been charting like their second down calls, which have been just incredibly exploitable. They're running on second and longs a lot, which I'm going to write about this more in the coming weeks. But there have been studies about how like the run on second and 10 or second and long 10 plus whatever is basically a wasted play. And you look at NFL teams like the Seattle Seahawks, who have almost completely eliminated it um, from their playbook, knowing that you're still going to be facing a third down that you're going to need to pass to get if you're running. So you're basically just cutting your opportunities to get the first down in half. Michigan needs to establish the run game better, but on second and long isn't the way to do it. And I think it's really maddening the way Michigan has been just really throwing away drives with having predictable, poor with very little success play calling, specifically on those second downs. So I like Josh Gaddis. I think he's good for the team. I think he's a good position coach, but I haven't been that impressed with his play calling. Going into the season, I was optimistic. I thought he called offensive games pretty poorly early on last season, but he grew into that role and did much better in the second half of the season. And I thought he'd be able to build onto that this year. And then after the Minnesota game, I was optimistic too, but I think that game, as we're seeing how things play out, maybe says more about Minnesota than it did about Michigan. And the 3 games that have followed, I've not been a fan of how the play calling has happened on offense. Timothy says, one thing that stood out was when Minnesota scored their first TD, Dax immediately pointed at someone and blamed him, which showed nobody trusts each other. Yeah, I try not to read too much into individual things, but I I think you can read into that what you want, and there have been a lot of body language things in the first month of the season that I just haven't been fond of, and I don't see that at a lot of successful programs. And I think how this team is carrying itself on the field now compared to is seemingly night and day. And um, causation, correlation, you can argue which is which, because yeah, the 16 team is going to be looser and happier because they're playing to win, but or they're playing and winning more. But are you playing and winning more because you're that, or the other way around? So it's kind of a chicken and egg thing. But some of those body language things are noted. Replacements, I'll get to that a little later. Nathaniel, hey Scott, just tuning in. Do you feel like more people are talking about Harbaugh's woes this season than Franklin's at PSU? And if so, why? I think absolutely. The why, I think Jim Harbaugh's a more polarizing figure than Franklin. I think Franklin has more friends in the national media. You're not seeing Pete Thamel stories every week on James Franklin, even though Penn State was the team that was in the top 10 heading into the season, and they haven't even won a game. But you're seeing it from Michigan. I'm not Mr. Woe is us, world is against us type thing, but a lot of things are written because Harbaugh's a polarizing figure. People want to read about him. There are a lot of people that don't like him and read it to get pleasure in that, and that's just kind of the reality of things. But like I said a couple minutes ago, in the offseason, I did that comparison on Harbaugh and Franklin, and it's pretty incredible that the like consensus national opinion when you have these national coach rankings and stuff are that James Franklin's a better coach than Jim Harbaugh, and the stats just don't show that. And even in the worst coaching season of Jim Harbaugh's career, which is this season, he's still doing better than James Franklin. So I will never understand the Franklin thing, but it is what it is. And I think that also comes with the territory of hiring kind of a high-profile coach like Jim Harbaugh. Michigan fans are only going to remember all of the annoying national press that comes Michigan's way, and there's been a lot of that, so I don't blame Michigan fans for that. But at the same time, you're not seeing other college football programs getting an ESPN reporter embedded with them on an overseas trip for a week, like ESPN did with Marty Smith. And Michigan gets a lot of that favorable coverage too, and it's just kind of it's easier to remember all the negative stuff than the positive stuff. So there is some good that comes with it too, but it seems to be leaning more on the bad side, and it's annoying as a fan, and I don't blame anyone for feeling that way. Mark says, is the 4th and goal from 12 inches out of a timeout, which Wisconsin saw the alignment with Milton and shotgun, and then call the same play the worst call of the Harbaugh Gaddis era, 250-pound QB sneak. Yeah, I don't have much to add. It was maddening. The game, it didn't impact the game, but it just further made it just an annoying game to watch. I don't get that play calling whatsoever. And to have the defense call a timeout to see what you're doing and then put in a defense to defend against that and still go and do that, I think shows a lot of arrogance on Michigan's part, and it's unfounded because the first 3.5 games leading up to that, Michigan hasn't been able to get its way in the trenches. And if you can't do that against Indiana or Michigan State, you're sure as hell not going to do that against Wisconsin. So it was just very annoying. So I share that frustration. Michael says, seems like the Big Ten has downloaded the Don Brown defense, and now 3 to 4 NFL players on D instead of 7 to 8 NFL players. We can't paper over the obsolete scheme with great players. Fair, yes, I think that's fair. I like Don Brown. I think what he did, I think his legacy is going to be tarnished here, and I think people are going to forget just how good his defenses were in the early stages of this. But I or any reasonable person defend what Michigan has done on defense this year. They are giving up 15 points per game more this season than their worst season previously under Brown. They are giving up over 125 yards a game more than their previous worst season. The wheels have just come off, and you're not seeing week-to-week adjustments to see this getting any better. So this is Don Brown's last season in Ann Arbor. I would be absolutely shocked if that's not the case. And if there was any benefit to firing him mid-season, I think it would have been warranted. But specifically this season, when you're already short a body with Bob Shoop's mysterious disappearance, you can't fire Don Brown and have that defensive room have 3 people instead of 5 and no coordinator. And if Shoop was still there, I think you could justify handing the keys over to him and seeing if you could salvage things. But that's just, you can't make an in-season move. You just have to make the best of it. And right now, the adjustments that are being made in season just aren't good enough. Nathaniel says, good answer. Thank you. Good taste. I agree. It was a great answer. And Lewis says, why can't they settle on a running back? I think running back is a really weird situation. I think, I mean, if you look at the stats, Hassan Haskins is the best running back on the team. If you judge the temperature of Twitter, I think most people say Zach Charbonnet is the best. And I think there is an increased push in getting him touches because of the rumors that he may be looking to transfer. I think you could argue from an upside standpoint that maybe you give Blake Corum the most touches because he's the youngest and he has the most opportunity to still blossom into a key cog for an extended period of time on the team. And then Chris Evans, his story is great. He is a very talented guy. He's made a couple big plays when he's gotten the opportunity. And it's just kind of shitty to sort of pencil him automatically as the number 4 guy and sort of the odd man out in this rotation when he stuck around and basically stuck around for a year just for the opportunity to get to play again. So I think there's justification in getting him touches too. But I agree this you can't have a 4-man rotation. They say if you have 2 quarterbacks, you don't have one. Obviously, there are successful running back tandems, but if there's an equivalent, then you say if you have 4 running backs, you don't have one, and none of these guys are getting enough touches to really establish themselves and break through. And if you look at people, mostly Haskins, but to a lesser extent Charbonnet last year, they had their big games when they were able to have multiple runs, multiple touches, and really sort of establish themselves. Part of the problem is you look at the Wisconsin game, and you're trailing by a lot, so it's going to be harder to run. And also, Michigan had the fewest plays they've had on offense in a single game of the Harbaugh era last week, and that's a combination of Wisconsin's offense keeping Michigan's defense on the field and keeping Michigan's offense off the field. And then in the rare chances that Michigan did have the ball, they just weren't doing anything with it. And so you're seeing a Wisconsin 7-minute possession followed by a Michigan 3 and out. And then all of a sudden, okay, Wisconsin's going to methodically march down the field again. And there just weren't many opportunities for people to touch the ball last week. Mark Van Ostel says, do you think Michigan should be playing younger guys sooner, even before the current record? They recruit great players, so play them. Yes and no. I think in my mailbag on my newsletter again, and thank you for the people that are in here that do subscribe. If you don't subscribe, I consider checking it out. I put a lot of time and effort into it, and I think people who do subscribe would back me up in saying that it's a good value. But I looked at about 10 places where I thought Michigan young players where it would make sense for them to step in and get more time. I think it's a little bit of sort of where we're at in college football culture in 2020, though, where the recruiting cycles are such a big deal that Michigan fans sort of seem to fall in love with these incoming players, maybe a little more so than in the past when there weren't as much coverage of that. So I think these players are built up and talked about and being so great, and the expectations for these people to come in and make immediate impacts are a little unfair in terms of their physical maturity, their ability to step in and understand a college playbook and really make an impact right away. There are some players that can absolutely do that. You look at Dax Hill last year. Cam McGrone stepped in because of an injury, but he showed that he could do some things, and you're seeing Michigan running backs and wide receiver spot this year having some freshmen walk in and do some things. So yes and no. I think now with where the season is, you need to get some of these young guys some time, but I don't necessarily think the problem prior to this point has been Michigan not giving their young guys enough of a chance, especially across the board, because these sophomores, juniors, and seniors that have been here, they've been here, well, if they're red shirts, up to 5 years, but they've gotten multiple years to become acclimated with the playbook, with the program, and most importantly, be in a college strength and conditioning program for multiple years. Johnny Rico says, do you believe scheme or recruiting has been Don Brown's biggest downfall? I think scheme. I know there's frustration with some of Don Brown's recruiting, and it's easy to say, oh, hey, look, it's a 3-star from the Northeast. Let's fall in love with him. But at the same time, you look at the people that have been making an impact on the defense this year and in recent years. A lot of it are the unheralded 3-stars. So I think with this program as a whole, not specifically talking about Don Brown, I think that 2017 class has been an absolute killer to the growth of this program, because there were a lot of highly rated guys, specifically those. That was the year that Michigan cleaned up inside the state of Michigan, had the top 6 guys in the state, and I think 7 of the top 8. And a ton of them just were complete busts, didn't pan out, not necessarily for all the fault of their own. There were some health things, injury things, things of that nature. But that class being a wipeout really hurt Michigan's interior defensive line specifically has just been troublesome. So that, I think that's a program-wide recruiting thing, but I don't think that's necessarily Brown specifically. So if we're talking about Brown's legacy and where things sort of went wrong the most, I would say scheme over recruiting, because I think that lack of adjusting and adapting is it's kind of just become sort of the scarlet letter on him and his legacy here, because what worked great 4 years ago just does not work now. And I think there is a little bit, I kind of talked about this with the offensive play calling, but I think there's a little bit of arrogance there in thinking this has worked for us before, so it's going to work for us now. And we're just going to be able to do this because we're Michigan, and that's just not the case anymore. Pete says, while Minnesota isn't scored more points against them than anyone else this season, do you think there's hope that some semblance of that offensive performance can be resurrected? I do. I really do. I'm not a it's been injuries or whatever, but the 2 teams Michigan has lost to in the last 2 weeks have been 2 top 15 teams, now 2 top 10 teams, and Wisconsin and Indiana both look like they're good teams. They're still teams that Michigan needs to be able to beat, but Michigan, the last 2 weeks on offense is more understandable than the Michigan State game, because the Michigan State game was still just a complete embarrassment across the board. But you have to keep in mind the last 2 weeks, Michigan's bookends on both sides of the offensive line, including both guys with NFL aspirations, that they haven't had their tackles. So that's a problem, and you're going to struggle a little more on offense if you don't have your offensive line. So yes, if we're saying, hey, is there hope that this can still be turned around? Yes, I think so. I think competition in the quarterback room is going to be helpful. I think Joe Milton's kind of regressed since that opener, but I think whether it's Cade McNamara coming in and playing like he did in that first drive last week, if he plays like that against Rutgers, I think that could be good news for the offense. I also think him breathing down Joe Milton's neck could sort of light a fire under Milton and have him step up again. So Joe Milton is a very physically gifted quarterback, and I think a lot of his mistakes in the last couple of weeks, it's back-to-back weeks, he's thrown passes directly to someone on the opposing team, and that's a mental thing. So he needs to get right between the ears, and I think he can. I think that's something that's he's able to overcome. It's not like he has to learn to get a stronger arm or become more physically gifted. Those tools are there, so it's kind of up to Milton to sort of get back on track. But if you're looking for an optimistic outlook, I think it's very possible, because you have a lot of good young talented guys And I think speed and space, when operating at where it can and should be operating, I think it can be a very dangerous offense. Andrew Rossi, how stoked are you for the Pistons to draft Emoni Bates #1 in the 2021 draft? That would be great for a number of reasons. My pro sports allegiances, I don't get as into pro sports as I do college stuff. I just don't have that same connection like I do to Michigan school that I went to, but I cheer for all the Detroit teams. I want Detroit to get back on track. I was happy with how the draft went last night, but if sending Kennard off is sort of a deft way to tank and to get yourself in position for a great draft pick next year, I would love for it to be Bates because he looks like a very, very good player. So I would love to have him in Detroit. And sadly, for even greater reason, I would love to keep him from East Lansing. Mark Weaver says, so with the Maryland game being canceled and 1-6 on the horizon, can we claim this season a success for Mel Tucker because he won Sparty Super Bowl, lifetime contract? This is the dream season to make fun of Michigan State for being so bad, which makes the loss to Michigan State all the more frustrating. But if you notice, I'm not talking shit about Michigan State this year because you know what? Michigan State beat Michigan, and they have the bragging rights. So as comically bad as they look, normally I'd take a lot of joy in that, but all it does is make the pain of this season even worse. So I'd love to make fun of Michigan State, but you know what? They outcoached and they outplayed Michigan in the week where they needed to. So hats off to them. And I also hear my kid upstairs, and I think that's the end of these questions. So I really appreciate the people that came in here. If you think this is a good idea, if you want these to continue, please give this a like. Let me know in the comments how this could be better. I actually think this went better than I kind of expected, but it's still probably going to be an either or with this or the podcast. So if you want this to continue, if you like this as a free option, liking this video, subscribing to the channel is good for the health of this account, and it's good to let me know kind of just what to prioritize. So I really appreciate the people that did spend time here, and if you are not subscribing to the newsletter too, I suggest you checking that out. But if not, thank you for coming here. You can still follow me on Twitter, and let's hope Saturday's football game is a little more entertaining than the previous 3 have been. Thanks, and we will talk to you later.